Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. Before we begin the main podcast today, I want to mention the Teagasc Crops Forum, which is running again this year, next Thursday at September the 8th in the Killishy Hotel Naas. The event will cover areas such as changes we can expect in CAP 2023, the new acre scheme, but also concentrate on the risks involved in producing crops for the harvest 2023. You can find out more details about this by going to teagasc.ie/events. We discussed oilseed rape as a planting option a couple of weeks ago, and it looks like there's a large increase in acreage on the cards for Ireland this year. Industry is saying that a 20% increase is not unreasonable, so we could be looking at a national crop of close to 20,000 hectares. This would put this year's rape crop as one of the biggest in recent memory. It's hard to get seed at the moment as it's all sold out in most co-ops, but there's still a substantial amount of area yet to be planted, as farmers were waiting for some soil moisture before planting. This lack of soil moisture looks like it'll be rectified towards the weekend, but it remains to be seen how much rain falls. Oilseed rape is often chosen as an option to control difficult weeds in fields, but with the dry soils and the extensive use of residual herbicides, many are nervous about how good these weed control will be. To discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined again by Ciarán Collins, a tillage specialist in Teagasc, to discuss some of the options. Ciarán, around the sowing date and the amount that's sown already or the amount that's expected to be sown, whereabouts is it, and why is there such a big increase this year?
Yeah, Michael, there's a lot of interest in oilseed rape this year. We've had an area in around 10,000 hectares for quite a few years, and it's been kind of steady at that. We did see an increase last year. I think we got up to about 14,500 hectares. And, it's hard to estimate at the moment, but certainly figures from, we'll say, the seed houses and that would indicate that the area is pushing towards 20. So reasons, I suppose the margin is going to be the first thing. We've seen oilseed rape prices increase, in the last 2 seasons, and, merchants are offering good forward prices at the moment in around, into the high 500s, maybe up towards 600, so that's when you do your crop budget at that kind of price, it does turn into a very, very good margin. And I suppose as well, people have recognized the benefits of break crops and they've seen it every year in the harvest. So I think those two combined, and I suppose finally then the weather obviously has been a big factor because, crops were harvested early, on time, straw was cleared, and now we've had the weather and the opportunity to sow. So I think there are a number of contributing factors, I suppose, Michael.
And we have, in fairness, talked about this before a few weeks ago in terms of people getting set up to put oilseed rape in. And I suppose in the meantime, there's been a fair share of it actually put into the ground, but only just about, Ciarán, I'd say. And maybe there's a good share of it still in the bag because farmers are probably just a little bit nervous as regards putting into such dry soils. Would that be the case?
Certainly, that is what you'd hear from farmers around the place. I suppose it's expensive to cultivate soils at the moment as well. But yeah, number of growers were certainly sort of holding off. Soil temperatures are high, and that there was no rain in the forecast up to now. Obviously, as we record now, there is rain in the forecast for the weekend. So certainly you'd expect some more to be going in these days, or maybe possibly even next week if it dries up again.
So Ciarán, was the dry soils to do with a concern around whether the oilseed rape would germinate in the first place, or is it to do with kind of weed control issues or concerns that's there, or is it something else that I'm missing? Why were people really holding off?
I suppose it's twofold, really. I suppose when you have really dry soils, sometimes you get quite uneven germination. So you'll pick up pockets of moisture. Obviously, people will roll and will do everything that they can to conserve moisture in the soil. You'll get a strike in some of it, and then when you get maybe rain, you'll get a second flush, which quite often happens. And sometimes that can be tricky for maybe some post-emergence herbicide applications. And I suppose the other concern maybe where people, wanted to use a pre-em, obviously dry soils, the pre-em herbicides won't work very well. They need moisture maybe to activate. So I suppose some people would have delayed maybe a little bit on that account as well, really.
So Ciarán, just in terms of pre-ems or post-ems, in terms of the best kind of strategy, where does it settle down? Are pre-ems better than post-ems?
Well, I suppose firstly it depends on what type of weed you expect in your field. But certainly, broadly speaking, preems do cover the broadest range of broadleaf weeds, and it does give you certainly the best opportunity. And I suppose if you're looking at a holistic and an all-in approach, if you're not sure what's there, certainly preem herbicides is a safe way to go. Okay, I suppose the other option then that some people have done in recent years, and we do have a better suite of products for post-emergence, is to wait and try and pick up grass weeds as well at the same time. But I suppose really it sort of depends on the field that you're in. But like I say, if you're expecting a weed challenge, preem is certainly the safer option. And I suppose I should also say, just for any growers that are planning on sowing rape now, it is worth a call to your local agri merchant just to make sure that product is in stock, because as I said earlier, with the increase in area, herbicide availability has been a little bit tight.
Yeah, and in terms of that preem treatment, that's they're generally the Butazans or the Catamaran Turbo kind of products that's out there that people might be looking for. But am I right in saying there might be a bit of an issue with that in very dry soils with heavy rain that I think is forecast over the next few days?
That's the tricky bit, I suppose, really, where people have put on a preem already. That rain that will come will certainly, activate that herbicide and will help it to work. But I suppose really the danger really, or the one that you're sort of concerned with, is putting on metazoclor, which you say is in Butazan or Catamaran Turbo, is if you get heavy rain immediately or within 48 hours of application, that's certainly to be avoided, because that, as the seed chits, I suppose the advice generally would be to wait, applied within 48 hours of drilling, but certainly avoid heavy rain, And I suppose some growers have opted this year, and I think it's a very sensible approach, with dry soils, is we'll say if we take Catamaran Turbo, where the full rate is 2.5 litres per hectare, they've gone for a split dose. So they've gone for 1.5 litres pre-M, and then follow up very early post-M with a litre. And I suppose that maybe adds a little bit to the crop safety bit as well. And like I said, there is big advantages in using the preem like metazoclor. It gives a good start on annual meadowgrass. It's very good on chickweed, mayweed, shepherd's purse, groundsel. So again, like I said, where you're expecting quite a range of broadleaf weeds, it certainly is probably a very good strategy.
But is there not another issue with that? And given, I suppose, the fact that there's many different and probably more varied establishment methods for oilseed rape than there is maybe for other cereals in sort of the min-till kind of way, and big subsoilers or that kind of stuff, that is it a case that the seed needs to be covered in soil, whereas some of those systems may not be great at doing that? Or where do you think that kind of lies?
Certainly, metazoclor can harm, emerging seedlings. So I think the label would generally state that you would need at least 15 mils of soil, so a good cover of soil. And I suppose if you're sowing method, or if you find for whatever reason that you haven't achieved that type of cover, you're probably as well off to wait for the crop to emerge and then use a post-emergence application instead.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. But so, Ciarán, in terms of the post-emergence type options that are, you mentioned one already where you can kind of split doses, but is there anything else there that could be used?
Yeah, I suppose sticking with the metazoclor type products, that is still a post-M option, I suppose the crucial thing there, if you are using, say, Catamaran Turbo post-emergence, be careful, number one, of the rate. The full rate is 2.5. Certainly maybe pull back a little bit from that. Now, that rate will depend a little bit on the weeds that you're trying to control, but it certainly is a good option. And we mentioned the maybe possible unevenness of germination early on as well. So I'd be getting out with my, whatever way you count your plants, go and get your plant count and make sure that you have your target plant count already. Say, you might be sowing, say, 50 seeds, you might be targeting 30, 35 plants, depending on, it'll be higher this year, obviously, good establishment percentages, hopefully, but just to make sure that you have enough emerged plants, because, that metazoclor, when it does hit that emerging shoot, it will do damage. And we've often seen, quite low plant populations as a result of that sort of early post-emergence. So get the plant counts done. If you're happy that you've sufficient numbers, get on good and early then.
So let's just say the crop is half the crop or a third of the crop is coming up at the moment. And we're going to get rain over the weekend, like in a couple of days' time, and we might get another flush. So we might get maybe more oilseed rape coming up, maybe say in a week's time or maybe 10 days' time. And now a grower is faced with maybe a 2-leaf or one pair of true leaves of the first emerged stuff and only a cotyledon of the second stuff. Applying the likes of catamaran to that, will that actually kill the one that's only coming through? Are you going to get real damage like that?
You will, yeah. We've seen that in the past. It's rate dependent, obviously, but certainly any contact with that emerging shoot will cause damage. And
does it matter about the rate, Ciarán? Is it will the half rate be okay rather than the full rate, or just no rate at all?
Well, look, you need to use a rate high enough to control the weeds that you're targeting. But what I'm trying to say is that you need to have your target plant population established in the field, because those emerging ones, there's a high probability that the herbicide will take them out. So, count the plants first, try and get your target plant population. And, once you're satisfied that you have that, I think then you're safe to go.
And is there any other herbicide that can be used in around that kind of early-ish timing?
Yeah, I suppose we're lucky that we have a few options now. Belcar is another one. It's a synthetic auxin. It's co-formulated with picalorum, and I suppose the advantage here is that it has a kind of a stronger foliar action, and can be applied later than we'll say the likes of catamaran turbo. So if the weather goes against you, it is a good option. It wouldn't quite have the broad spectrum of weeds like a pre-em of catamaran turbo would have, but it's certainly a very, very useful product. And get some key weeds that we're trying to deal with, like cleavers, cranes, bill poppy, can be problematic for some growers, and it's really, really good on fumetry. So that's certainly a good broadleaf weed option as well, Michael.
And is that a total solution, or is there in the fact that I suppose some of the catamarans will be kind of, I suppose, looked upon as a fairly total solution for the broadleaf weeds at least? The Belcar, would that be looked at in the same way, or does it need something pretty hefty afterwards? I was thinking about something like the curbs and things like that. Does it need a follow-up?
Yeah, it will need a follow-up. Yeah, we'll need a follow-up. Certainly, I suppose the grass weeds would be the obvious one, when you compare it with the likes of astrocurb, and that, it will have weakness as well, particularly the likes of speedwell there, I suppose, is a very kind of a common weed that would occur. So it's not a total solution. And like I say, for anybody that's planning their oilseed rape, I would still say that pre-emerge with the likes of catamaran turbo will certainly give you the broadest spectrum of broadleaf weeds.
But even with that, am I right in saying you'd still need a grass weed control in the middle of that anyway?
Absolutely. This is just broadleaf weeds only. Yeah, certainly.
So most of those are going to be followed up. And at what stage do we need, or should a farmer try and take out those grass weeds, or I suppose the volunteers are probably going to be the biggest one, I suppose.
Yeah, the volunteers are the one that are going to cause the most problems, I suppose, really, and especially they can be in the swarts. You can get a line of them, especially, if we're using, which a lot of growers do use now for oilseed rape, min-till type systems, so, that seed is that volunteer wheat or barley is very near the surface. You'll get very quick establishment, and, those volunteer cereals do give rise to early competition with the establishing rape. And, you'll often see bare patches, in fields of oilseed rape if there are high numbers of volunteer cereals. So, you're getting in with a graminicide there really as early as possible if the numbers are high, really,
1 to 2 leaf stage of the cereals, or a bit later, 3 leaf stage maybe?
Yeah, I suppose the earlier the better, really. But look, yeah, certainly that 2 to 3 leaf stage would be ideal, because again, just like the crop, you're going to get maybe a little bit of a staggered emergence a little bit there as well.
Sure. Okay. The other, I suppose, bulk, and what we were talking about there is kind of the conventional and the hybrids, but there's also those Clearfield varieties that are out there, which are ones that are more specifically targeted, I suppose, to specific instances and the use of Chloranda as their herbicides. What about those? Are the same concerns there around the pre-emerge, post-emerge type scenario? What way does that work?
Yeah, so anybody growing a Clearfield variety, I suppose, will be aware there's the prefix CL will be on the side, and you're just really using Clarenda there. That's the reason, I suppose. Clarenda, it can only be applied to Clearfield varieties. Obviously, it will take out all brassicas, including non-Clearfield oilseed rape. So just be careful of that one. But I suppose its big advantage, and the reason a lot of growers would use Clearfield varieties, is that it does control brassica weeds that we don't really have any control of now. And it's a good all-round herbicide anyway. It does control the likes of groundsel, fumitree, poppies there as well. In terms of timing, the rate is 2 litres per hectare. Again, like a lot of post-emergent weed control, early is best, small, actively growing weeds, and I suppose just to mention that we're on that area salsa, which a number of growers would have used maybe for the control of, say, charlock in the past. That's no longer available. So
go back again to AstroCurb that we talked about, or we mentioned earlier, which is very good on grass weeds, or Curb, I suppose, and there's AstroCurb in 2 different products, but Curb is very good on the grass weed side of the house. Is there any case where the Curb on its own, just on its own, is the only herbicide you're going to use, of which you probably won't be using that until probably mid to late October, I suppose, at the earliest, I suppose. Is there any case where that can be used on its own, because that's pretty costly in its own?
Yeah, I suppose there is. And again, so just to mention the availability again, just check that everything is available before you decide on your strategy, because you might say, I'll wait till October, November, and it turns out that you can't get the product. But yeah, look, AstroCurb, or the Curb on its own, I suppose, really is an excellent grassweed product. It's controlling all the main species that we're worried about, even blackgrass, your brooms, annual meadowgrass. It's excellent. And as you say, Michael, the recommendation is that soil temperatures are below 10 degrees Celsius. So that can often be into November, even December, before you can get that done. So if you've done a good job on your broadleaf weeds already, you get to that stage there before Christmas or in November, Curb on its own will obviously suffice and is excellent. I suppose where the aminopyralid, which is in AstroCurb, comes in then, is it does add a number of broadleaf weeds there. And I suppose really where somebody hasn't had the opportunity to get anything on, and it is a really, really good option at that stage. It will be the last option, I suppose, almost for some growers at that stage.
Sure, but it does have a pretty wide window if you can get the availability of it.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I suppose another point is there is a bit of a restriction in terms of using AstroCurb in terms of straw, is there?
Yeah, just to be careful, I suppose, with the straw chopping scheme now, people tend to chop oilseed rape straw, but just to be careful that any straw treated with aminopyralid, which is in the AstroCurb and not in the straight curb, that needs to remain in the field. Basically, shouldn't be baled or used for animal bedding. I suppose it can be used if somebody is using it for heat generation or that, but yeah, it needs to be left in the field if aminopyralid has been used.
Okay, just to switch it around just slightly, I suppose, and listeners can go back a couple of weeks ago and they can listen to a good bit more around oilseed rape, and we covered a little bit around slugs at that stage. We didn't mention at that stage cabbage stem flea beetle, though, of which is a major problem in the UK and has caused massive problems over there. Any reports of that so far, Ciarán, in Ireland, or is it something that we have been traditionally worried about in the past?
We've seen it. Certainly, we've seen plenty of damage. We've seen the pest, cabbage stem flea beetle, and we've seen obviously the symptoms, which are typically shot holes in the leaves, that people would be familiar with. It hasn't presented a massive problem for us like the UK. I suppose in the UK, our number of key differences. One is the area of rape, obviously, and the rotation is probably much higher than Ireland. Like I said, initially, we've been hovering in around 10,000 odd hectares there in recent times, so it's quite low. Secondly, then, is the whole area around pesticide resistance, which obviously that's developed pyrethroids there in the UK, and that's caused a decrease in the area in the UK as a result. So again, like I said, it hasn't caused major problems, but I would certainly keep an eye out for it. And I suppose the thresholds are, if 25% of the leaf has been damaged, When 2 leaves have unfolded, treatment with insecticide is advised. And if 50% of the area of a leaf has been damaged when 3 leaves have unfolded, or if the crop is being eaten quicker than it is growing, basically, treatment is required there as well. So it is important to keep an eye out, just for those shot holes that will appear in the leaf.
And do we have any idea in terms of the resistance bit?
No, I don't think there's any work being done here on it, and I haven't heard any reports from farmers having any control difficulties, to be honest.
Okay, I suppose the fact that there has been very little of it in the past mightn't have got a huge amount of insecticides anyway, so that might be helpful to a degree. Ciarán, just a final question I want to ask you. We started off talking about the potential of what's going to be sown out there, but we did mention that it mightn't all be out of the bag as yet. It comes up pretty much any year, and if I was a grower out there, I'd be looking at the weather kind of thinking, I don't know what, it's still pretty much the summertime. I have plenty of time to get this in. What is the latest date, give or take, for planting oilseed rape?
I suppose the smart answer is as soon as possible, but I think, the reason that we want to get rape and a canopy developed, early in the autumn is for green leaf area, which obviously hoovers up a lot of that available soil nitrogen. And we may get a lot of that now if we do get a bit of rain, some mineralized nitrogen coming up, in the back end. The earlier we grow a bigger canopy, it means our costs are obviously lower because we need to apply less nitrogen to the crop. So certainly, ideally, it would be sown the month of August. Growers have pushed it out, and I suppose you're a little bit at the mercy of the weather. Obviously, soil temperatures are quite high at the moment, so anybody going out, say today is the 1st of September, getting out and getting it done, I wouldn't be that worried. But certainly, once you start to hit the second week in September, you're certainly into dodgy territory. Soil temperatures will start to drop at that stage. So I think, Michael, look in the next week, ideally, really.
Yeah, you'd probably need a crystal ball from there after that. If you knew that we were going to have a back end like last year, for instance, you could probably get away with it a bit later than that, but that's a rare occurrence. So as you say, get it in as fast as you can. Ciarán, thanks very much for your time, for joining me again, and look, we'll be chatting again shortly.
No bother. Thank you.
Just a couple of areas to mention before I sign off for today. In order to understand the aspects of the podcast which are most appealing and beneficial to you, I would greatly appreciate if you could take 3 to 4 minutes to complete the survey. The details of this are in the podcast notes. As mentioned at the start of the podcast, don't forget about the Crops Forum this Thursday in the Killishy Hotel in Naas, and I'll certainly look forward to seeing you there. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, and recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.